And if everyone would stand for a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. Recorder, if you'd call the roll.
Chairman Floyd.
Present.
Vice Chair Harrison.
Here.
Deborah Thomas. Jeremy Burnett. Michelle Childs. Superintendent Horrell.
We do have a quorum. Mr. Superintendent, would you lead us through our agenda?
I will. The first item is the opportunity for public comment.
Would anyone from the public like to speak? Hearing none. Next item.
Next item, we move into the reports section, starting with the chairman's welcome.
I'd like to welcome everyone to our February business meeting. I almost forgot what month it was. This is our business meeting, and we will run through and vote and approve items as normal. It's hard to believe that 2021 is moving pretty fast so far. We have Ms. Lockhart and Principal Adler in attendance, and we always appreciate their time and willingness to be present at these meetings. Having said that, I believe that concludes my report, and we'll move on to the next item.
Next item is the TLN representative update.
Yes, so I'll just do a really brief recap since I went in more detail last week about what had happened. And essentially, the legislation during their special session decided with TCAP testing, teacher evaluations would be excluded, but 80% must be done in person or the LEA will not be held harmless. Summer camps are required to be offered. Third grade retention starting 2022-2023 will be based on TCAP scores. There was a pretty hefty literacy bill. There were teacher pay raises, and the General Assembly opens back up today. And the Tennessee Supreme Court is going to hear an appeal regarding school vouchers. And the Lakeland School Board has met with 3 of our legislators, and we have 2 more scheduled to meet with.
Thank you for that report. Any questions on the TLN report? Hearing none. Next item.
Next item is the superintendent report. I gave a pretty thorough report last week, so I don't have too much else to add, but I would like to congratulate the students who have been selected to be on the first ever Lakeland Preparatory School baseball and softball teams. Those teams have both been announced. My understanding is the baseball team at this moment is working out right now or practicing. So we're excited to add another couple of activities for our students at Lakeland Preparatory School and in Lakeland School System. The other part of my report that I'd like to take a moment with is this is the meeting at which we observe School Board Appreciation Week, which is the Tennessee School Boards Association observation of the great men and women that run school boards throughout Tennessee. I believe it is well known and acknowledged in our school system, certainly, that in particular in Lakeland, without the vision and determination and tenacity and support of our school board members, then first of all, the system itself wouldn't be possible. Not every board can say that, but there may not be a school board or a Lakeland school system at all without school board members and this team in particular, but also I think the continued success and support, certainly that the board members give to me, but more importantly to every member of the Lakeland school system family, from the teachers to the staff and everyone in between. So just so the public is aware that we do celebrate these folks, we do have a meal provided for the school board and their families, because we know that when a school board member gets elected, it's not just that individual that's being impacted, it's the entire family, and we acknowledge that and appreciate it and hope you'll take home something good to eat for your families, and got a few things for you guys as well. But most importantly, one of the most fun things we do typically is Mr. Adler and Ms. Lockhart do an amazing job kind of putting together some presentations, typically that involve big groups of students and their parents, often packed in here. It's usually the most jam-packed school board meeting that we have. But as we all know, for obvious reasons, That's not advisable right now, but that did not stop them from putting something together virtually, as we've done so many things this year. So if we could, I'd like to request that the school board's attention be put over here to this video, and I'll let y'all check that out. I will post this video to the Lakeland School System Facebook page tomorrow, most likely, if folks can't see it right now, which I don't think they'll be able to. us going. Thank you to Ms. Lockhart, Mr. Adler, and your students for putting that together. Thank you all so much. But you love our board, so.
Miss seeing them in person, but thank you. Thank you for bringing them here. That was wonderful.
All right, well, moving on from the superintendent's report, we do have the January financial summary, which you can find attached to the agenda. It's just a rundown as we do monthly. There's not any concerns that I'm aware of. We seem to be tracking. I will say we have not seen any negative consequences from COVID-19. We've mentioned that before, but in terms of economic impact that so many of us feared, it didn't have the impact on the tax base that we had anticipated. So we continue so far at least to not see any negative implications for the school system.
Questions for the superintendent? And normally I would say after a presentation like that that's the best part of the meeting and there's no point in hanging around because that's the best thing you'll hear. But unfortunately nobody's here to hang around anyway, so, but it'll still be the best thing you hear in the meeting.
That's right.
So we thank you, Ms. Lockhart, for that and the kids and everybody that put in time and effort to make it happen. It's truly our honor to serve and it's our blessing to see what the kids can do at Lakeland Elementary and LPS. It's truly a privilege. Any other questions or comments on the superintendent report? Hearing none, we'll move to the next item.
Next item is the approval of the agenda.
Any objection to the agenda as typed? Hearing none, we'll consider the agenda approved.
Next item is the consent agenda. It has 7 items: the approval of the business meeting minutes from January 11th, the update to policy 5.302 sick leave, update to policy 6.300 code of behavior and discipline, and code of conduct, update to policy 6.313 discipline procedures, update to policy 6.402 physical examinations and immunizations, update to policy 6.500 special education students, and update to the 2021 school fees list.
Motion to get this item on the floor. We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Are there any items anyone would like to remove from the consent agenda? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Next item.
Next item, as we move into the... Sorry, those of you at home. As we move into the discussion topics, we first have an assessment of facilities planning for next year, which is policy 3.208, and that is a presentation. It does not require any action from the board, but it's a presentation to the board as required by policy 3.208.
Is there a motion to get this item on the floor? We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Dr. Horrell, the floor is yours.
All right, if y'all will forgive me just a moment to transition from we have here to where we need to be.
Live stream meetings with that sound.
House is very...
In the middle between the two white fields, the horizontal area and the blue field has a green text. Low facilities planning presentation in the blue area. At least there was on mine. Maybe you took it off. Do you see it?
Okay, I may see what you say, but I think it'll be okay.
Okay. Here.
Okay. Okay, have not quite presented with the new live stream where you have to stay on the mic like this, so it's a little bit different. But the point of tonight is to not only look at facilities planning really for next year, but just to give an overview of kind of our facilities situation. We have really satisfied the requirements of this policy because just about every year there have been significant presentations about our facilities and the need for new facilities and kind of facilities coming down the pike. Obviously, we've been talking about Lakeland Prep since 2014, the summer of that year, but this is, I wanted to make it a little more formal to both share with the board and the public just a few data points kind of on where we are on some of the things that are covered under that policy. So just to give an overview of where we are right now, at Lakeland Elementary School, we have 1,008 students in grades K through 4 there, plus 34 preschool students. So obviously, it's a good thing that we did that 12 classroom expansion a couple of years back, because we definitely have been pushing the limits of what that building could do for some time. And very frankly, we continue to push the limits. Ms. Lockhart and her faculty and staff are spread throughout the building. There is more capacity there, and I think right now, the staff and faculty are in what we would call a comfortable situation, in that everybody has a space really that needs one. We are getting to the point where they will have to start pushing people maybe back out of spaces that they're able to use for specific purposes like ESL and special ed, and get back into, which is not uncommon, unfortunately, in schools. But it's been amazing how quickly we've been able to spread out and kind of take over the new classroom addition. At LPS this year, we have 851 students, and in the high school range, we have 743. So this is reported from Arlington Community Schools. We don't tend to have numbers on Lakeland students that are in private schools or elsewhere, but between our schools and Arlington High School, those are the numbers that we have right now. I will point out that of that enrollment, about 60, about 30 at LES and about 30 at LPS are transfers. The only transfers that we accept are employee transfers, so those are children of either Lakeland School System or City of Lakeland employees. This was interesting and encouraging from a preview of the Tennessee State Report Card. They do an analysis based on the number of teachers and the number of students, and they do count more than just classroom teachers, so I don't want to give a false sense of the numbers in an actual classroom, because they do count, PE teachers and specialty teachers as well. But we were pleased to find that LES was listed as a 14-to-1 student-to-teacher ratio, and LPS was a 17-to-1. The 14-to-1 ratio was the lowest of any elementary school that I looked at as far as what we consider our peer schools, mainly in this area. There were no others that I found that were 14-to-1. 17-to-1 at LPS was also the lowest, but there were some others that were 17-to-1. So we were among the lowest of kind of our peer schools, and we're the lowest, the only one, with a 14-to-1. We've really done a lot of work in the last couple of years. We've been kind of playing from behind with staffing for some time, and particularly at Lakeland Elementary School. We would tend to find that the last several years, we'd get this huge influx of students that we didn't anticipate because of the growth and people kind of coming back to LES. And a lot of times Ms. Lockhart would have to make the difficult decision of, do I really want all these new teachers and then start pulling students out of the classes where they've already been assigned, or do we just make do with some slightly higher student-faculty ratios, frankly. We finally kind of gotten caught up. I think our predictions have become more accurate in terms of how many students to accept. And also there is a certain leveling of as far as those huge spikes that we saw the first really 3 years of Lakeland School System, and then certainly the first couple of years at Lakeland Preparatory School, then Lakeland Middle School, when students were kind of coming back from other places where they had maybe gone. So we're getting a little bit better at being able to predict. The projections for next year, these are really hot off the presses from the demographer that we use, Dr. Jerome McKibben, who again, he's also become more refined at, I think, making these projections. For LES, next year he's predicting an increase of 35 students. At LPS, an increase of 16. And in the high school range, he's predicting an increase of 52 students overall. Let's talk a little bit about the current facilities that we have. LES is 117,000 square foot facility. I apologize, I need to update that. That is actually pre-expansion. The 117 was the pre-expansion number. And forgive me for not having that right. But the rest of it is the right amount. That is 62 classrooms. If you do just basic classrooms times 20, and I know there is a history of different opinions on how to judge school capacity, and I don't want to wade into that. I'm doing it very mathematically. It's the number of regular classrooms times 20, which is an appropriate elementary school range. We would have a capacity of 1240 is what we would say there. Now, again, that's not necessarily an optimal capacity for the elementary school, but very strictly speaking, in terms of classes of kids that were in regular classrooms, and that means that other individuals and school staff would have to make do, perhaps with other spaces or floating, it would be a 1240. At LPS, the existing is 113,000 square feet. There are 34 regular classrooms, and that's the same that I used at Lakeland Elementary. Those are regular classrooms. It doesn't count specialty spaces like music, art, PE. We would say at 25 a classroom, which is a better number to use for middle school, we found it would have an 850 capacity. Now, I don't want to be confusing to people, because we had said when we built the school we were building it for 900. We used a 27 student per classroom capacity, which is appropriate for middle school, but we have just found over time is not realistic, and we adjusted that in the projections for the high school. And I'll give you an idea of how we did that. And I think Mr. Adler would agree 850 is probably closer than 900 in terms of what we've found. So they're pretty much right now operating at capacity at the middle school. But as we noticed, we do have a lower student-teacher ratio than many of the other schools in our peer group. So there is some room for growth. I think next year they'll be fine, but we have very quickly kind of, again, taken over these spaces at both schools. All right, under construction at LPS is an additional 232,000 square feet of space at Lakeland Preparatory School. That's 54 new classrooms. Again, that is just standard classrooms. That does not count CTE, science labs, art rooms, fine arts rooms, even fine arts classrooms. It doesn't count the theater teacher's room or the television teacher's room, for example. So just strictly new classrooms. Made a very conscious decision that we were going to overbuild. We were not going to make the same, kind of conservative estimate on how many classrooms would be needed as we did at the middle school. So if you take that to 25 per classroom, that's a capacity for 1,350. Now keep in mind, high school classes tend to be bigger even than middle school classes, but if we stick with that 25 number, there would technically be a capacity for 1,350 in the new wing alone. If you put those together, LPS, you'd have a 345,000 square foot facility with 88 classrooms with a potential capacity of 2,200 for the combined middle and high school. How does that make you feel, Mr. Adler? Go pack them on in there. No. That's the expanded LPS. All right, I wanted to take Dr. McKibben's projections and kind of look ahead to his projections, which it's harder the further you get out to make projections like that. But what he would project is in August of 2025, which would be the first year where we would be K-12, very technically preschool to 12, that at K4 we would have 1,130 students plus preschool there at LES, and at LPS in 5-8 we'd have 1,006, and 9-12, 934 for a total of 1,940 at LPS. Now, as we've said, that does leave some room to grow, but not much, even at the combined middle and high school. Now, keep in mind that it's about to be August of 2022, or I'm sorry, 2021. So that's 4 years, even beyond this next year. I'm sorry, it'd be 5 years from the end of this school year. 5 years from the end of this school year. So That is a little bit out, but it is something for the school board, I think, to consider. We are aware that we're looking for property for a future elementary school or intermediate school, as we've kind of discussed very, very tentatively. And I remember 2 years ago when we were having conversations about that and how far out would we need, possibly, would we get to the point where we needed that elementary school? And I remember 2 years ago we said it would probably be 5 or 6 years. It's been a couple of years from there. So it's definitely something, it's not planned. I want to be clear to the public. There are no concrete plans besides purchasing some land. But it is something that I think needs to be on our radar, because at some point, especially if we continue to see the kind of growth that we're seeing in Lakeland as people come to the city, I think driven in part, at least, if not largely, by the school system, it does kind of feed the need there itself. So what I've done, and I don't want anyone to think there are any decisions that have been made, but I wanted to take a look at what it would look like if there was an LIS, I'm calling that right now, a Lakeland Intermediate School that would be somewhere between an elementary and the combined middle and high school. And I think it's telling that if you just took grades 4 to 6, which is just one potential grade configuration, let me make that clear. If you took the 4th grade out of the elementary school and decided to take 5th and 6th out of Lakeland Prep, you would have 728 students. That's not a small school size, particularly for an elementary or intermediate school. And then if you were to extrapolate that, this is what it would look like if again, another school like that were to open at the same time that we kind of built out Lakeland Prep. We would have, with the first senior class, we would have 872 at LES, 728 at Lakeland, a Lakeland Intermediate School. I'm also not naming the school, I'm just saying a Lakeland Intermediate School. And LPS, you'd have, I think, a very comfortable 1456 in grades 7 through 12. I will note the 7 through 12, even though it does break up the middle school, that's not an uncommon configuration. It's more of a kind of junior-senior high model. There's a number of private schools in the area, frankly, that have a split between 6th grade and 7th grade, so it certainly wouldn't be unprecedented. Like our combined middle and high school, it would be unusual for public schools in our area, but we've proven we can make things work. Again, this is not a proposal or a request to do this. It's just a look at what those numbers potentially could look like if the kind of growth that we're seeing projects out to 2025. We are fortunate in that our middle school facility is obviously relatively new. So in terms of maintenance needs, there don't tend to be as many. I will say Lakeland Elementary School is 20 years old. There are some things that could certainly, I think, enhance the elementary school. Like I know Ms. Lockhart would probably like some new carpet. No. You may have misheard me, Ms. Lockhart. I said she would probably like some new carpet. Some paint would go a long way. We are winding up seeing probably more maintenance things where things are breaking down, understandably, in terms of plumbing, and we did get new HVAC systems for the entire school, which is nice. We have one wing that's entirely new, but as far as just facilities needs, it is something we're keeping an eye on. And in fact, specifically, we are planning to increase those maintenance budgets a little bit next year versus what they've been for the last couple of years, just as we start to see some of those things happen. So that really concludes my presentation, just kind of a look in terms of data at where we are, kind of where we seem to be heading, and some things maybe to start thinking about as growth continues in Lakeland school system. So at this point, I'll open it up for any questions that you have, if there are any.
Any questions for the superintendent? Ms. Harrison?
So I remember several years back, I believe it was maybe Nedra Jones that came when she presented. I don't know if it was her, but we had somebody come and speak to the optimum, or what they had seen historically in legacy Shelby County schools, as far as an optimum operating number. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was 90% capacity of a building.
That's the number that I recalled as well. Yeah.
So can you go back to the screen where it talks about so if, just each of them, so if we're currently at LES, I think, so if you do the 90% number, that's 11, is that 1116, I believe? And so what was our current number? I'm just trying to get my head around.
1042 including preschool.
And 42, yeah.
So we're about 100 shy of optimal operator, or where you kind of want to stay is that 90% number. In the middle school, we're certainly over because that number is 850 times 0.9, which is 765. So and we're currently at,
We're kind of right at it, yeah.
yeah, so.
I mean, right at,
we're
right
over
at,
it.
we're over it, yeah, I'm sorry, we're at 100%.
And then, so when we open the high school, what is that number? So that would put us at the new, I mean, when we get to full.
Yeah, so the,
2025 numbers.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, so 2,200, so you're going to want the 1940,
Right.
Divided by
And so
2,200.
interestingly, the 2,200 times 0.9 is 1980. So we'll be really close to the 90% optimum capacity that they have seen for successful outcomes, efficiencies in the building, changing classes, all those things that get us there. I just thought that was interesting when I started running the math, that when we get to the year we're fully built out, now we're at that optimum, and assuming we continue to grow, then it becomes apparent, depending on the rate of growth, that we
stops
will
being
need
optimum
something-
really quickly.
We'll be beyond optimum outcomes, or I don't know if outcomes is the right word, but optimum operating number, which is that 90% number. Okay, I just want to make sure I was clear and right.
Yeah,
and doing the
I believe
math.
your
Okay.
recollection is correct on
Okay.
that.
Any other, Mr. Burnett?
Dr. Horrell and I met this morning and discussed some of these numbers a little more in depth too. And as he sent this, I just want to point out that one of the assumptions the demographer made, very conservative, 75 homes, now to 29. We had 100 plus this past year, new home permits. So we're likely to exceed that number unless the city starts to change takes on some new developments that are already in the works that they are going to change those numbers significantly. I've heard one commissioner say as much as 250 homes, new homes, that's in planned developments. So I'm a little, I will say, concerned about those numbers because I'm a little concerned by those numbers because I think they're a little conservative. And I don't want to get where we're not even beyond an optimum capacity. We're putting people in hallways. This year, I think in a few cases, just to make room. We need to start having conversations about a long-term plan. I think you said earlier, 5 or 6 years. Don't want us to get down to the point where we have to have hard conversations to create issues again. OC met this weekend, and their number one priority was unity. To share these numbers with the BOC, really honestly, to have that conversation about what the future construction looks like for a LIS. Not naming it either, just referring to what you called it.
If I can make one note, that was 75 new housing units per year. Okay, I'm sorry, I thought you said total. Okay.
Oh, yeah, no, and I was just saying there were 100 this year. Was one of the reports we got on another board I'm on.
Well, 100 built out, okay.
Thomas?
Getting preschool numbers, right now we have 34 kids. Does that includes our kids and the typical peers, right? So how many of our spaces at the elementary school do we have that are equipped for a growth of preschool kids? Because we know we always get them. We don't know when we're going to get them. But when we find out we have kids who need to be served in preschool, then we have to have space. So what does that look like at the current Lakeland Elementary School?
We don't really have spaces that are, built for preschool. Presumably, a preschool classroom would have the same kind of setup as a kindergarten classroom, and we've outstripped because of the number of kindergarten classrooms that we have, they would,
We moved, if we did something like this and moved the fourth grade to an intermediate kind of model, then that would create space for the eventuality that we'll have more preschool kids.
right, yep.
Okay. Because there's only a difference of those projections. That's 110 fewer than the 1,240 capacity that you told us about. So there's 110 kids, 110 bodies, but when you get a preschooler, you need to have a typical peer. So, right, so it fills up even more quickly than
Right.
you would think. Is
That's
my
correct.
point. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Ms. Childs.
I had a couple questions. My first one is along the lines of Mr. Burnett's question. I mean, where exactly do they get 75? Because I know there's a lot of subdivisions being built, 75 per year. I know there's a lot of subdivisions being built, and then also there's two different apartments between the Lakeland Commons or Lakeland Town Square and the Lake District. And I know there's phases on these, so I don't know. I was curious about that. And then the second question I had was, with these predictions, how did they change either plus or minus if our district and surrounding districts aren't in person in the fall? Because that was also mentioned.
I'm sorry, tell me the last, well, I'll answer the first question first.
Okay.
I don't know where, he does get the number of new housing units built out and completed, is what he's saying, which is slightly different than a permit being issued, I suppose. So he does go back, and he has adjusted that actually over time. I think it was 50, maybe 4 years ago, the first time he did it, when we weren't building as much. So he gets the actual data from, the community and does that. And I'm sorry, repeat the question about the virtual students?
Yeah, so he listed an assumption that his assumption was based on our district and surrounding districts being in person full-time in the fall. That being,
I think from some conversations with him, he acknowledged that we actually had significantly less and maybe not any changes to enrollment than the other districts that he has worked with. So I think that may be some boilerplate language that he's kind of assuming no real change. I think what he saw in a lot of districts is that districts that didn't open with in-person learning did see drops in enrollment as people found their ways to private schools or other districts or things like that. So I think he's saying if we keep doing what we're doing, it kind of it keeps those assumptions. But if we were to say, you know what, we're going all virtual, then some of those numbers may wind up being different because people literally, will leave the district for reasons like that.
I didn't know if he was making an assumption that if, let's say, a large district near us stayed virtual for the fall, if that might, increase our numbers by more people trying to move. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and then my final question was the 4 through 6 idea. And I see where the value of it alleviating off of both schools. But would that make, 6th grade sports really weird, or it just be where, they'd have to go to the preparatory campus, or?
It would take some coordination, yeah, between the schools, certainly. It'd be similar, I think, to the way the 9th grade academy works in Bartlett. Those kids get on an activity bus and they head over to Bartlett, and some of the 9th graders play, if they're good enough, on the JV teams or maybe even a varsity team, and they've got to kind of coordinate that and schedule. So it would definitely be a consideration, because that 6th, 7th, and 8th is a more traditional, as far as sports goes, kind of split. But you could also, a team could say, our middle school team will just have 7th and 8th graders, and we'll have a dedicated 6th grade team, for example. But it would be something to consider.
Ms. Harrison.
But I wanted to ask a little bit more clarification on, at Lakeland Elementary, currently you said we have like ESL and some of those things in their own spaces. And so what does it look like when we crowd those spaces out, or crowd where they don't have their own space? Is it kids are called out of class and they go to other rooms? Is it the teachers go to the students? How does that look, whatever those activities are that we're starting to push out, or those, whatever, interventions or whatever it is, what do they look like when we push them out of a regular classroom space?
Ms. Lockhart left. I was gonna, sometimes you wind up with shared classrooms that are kind of activity rooms where, maybe one period it's used for ESL and the next period it's used for an intervention pull out, and the next period it's maybe used for, it could be, it's used for speech therapy, where basically, if the teacher's not teaching class in there, they got to go somewhere else. Whereas right now, they tend to kind of have, that's their room. That's their room, and if nobody's in there, they can sit in there and plan. But you have to kind of flex the rooms a little bit. It could also be, if you get, and this is less common than you would think, you could get to a situation where the kids in a regular classroom are down at music at the same time every single day, and that becomes the ESL room while those kids are at music. And so another teacher and other kids come in there and they use the room and then they clear out. All of this sounds like a nightmare during the pandemic, doesn't it? Like
That's
those
what
are
I was
things that
just thinking.
it makes you think differently about those things. But
Yes, and
it's
that
just-
was exactly why I was asking the question, because of the current situation we're in. And not to say that I think the pandemic will end, but hopefully it would end by the time we got to that point. But who knows if there's going to be another pandemic. And so I have concern about operating above at least that optimal capacity, or,
Oh, yeah.
or pushing that limit. And so I think it's a very valid discussion with where we're at, certainly involving the city too, with where we're at with the pandemic and what we now know that we all never expected or couldn't thought about in these terms. So I just want to make sure that we keep that in the conversation as well, because what you described sounds like a nightmare for pandemic status. It really does.
Other comments or questions for the superintendent?
Not just in regard to pandemic environment, but yeah, it's really hard on teachers too, to not have a place to be able to park and plan and collaborate with other people who might have the same planning period. It's hard to have that part like our teachers are doing now, but in a regular non-pandemic world, it's really hard to float. That's hard. And I think one of the silver linings of what has happened with COVID-19 is that we do have smaller groups at LPS, and there's been a lot that it's been, kind of a intimate setting where everybody knows everybody a little bit better. I think the ability to forge those relationships, it was kind of forced at the beginning because it had to be that way, but I think that those smaller numbers have really been beneficial psychologically and emotionally and socially. I think that we've learned some things that we should not give up, which is those smaller classroom teacher-student ratios.
Dr. Horan, I'm going to put you on the spot. When do you think, based on the data we have today, data changes just like the weather, it might be different tomorrow, we would need to have an operational third school?
That definitely puts me on the spot. Again,
I will tell you, just
You know,
based on what I've seen, 2025, 2026, 2027, maybe at the latest.
I would certainly think at the latest, and I mean, I meant it about 2 years ago, and it was part of the high school conversation. I mean, people would say, well, you're going to need another elementary school. My answer would be, I don't think we'll need another elementary school for another 5 or 6 years. The response in terms of businesses and people coming to Lakeland that I do think is linked to the opening of the middle school and certainly the approval of the high school has really outpaced even what I anticipated, and I kind of anticipated that there would be a response like that. Again, 2 years ago when I said 5 or 6 years, that would have been, 2024 or so even. I think when you look at these numbers, I think you're really going to start pushing it if you were starting to think beyond that 2025. I'll also say that winds up solving some traffic problems potentially at the high school, which I know would be attractive to a lot of people, obviously, if you were to get a couple of grade levels of mainly car riders out of the middle school at the same time that seniors were being added to the high school. But I think to keep, being able to do what we're doing with the kind of quality that people have come to expect, I think I'd say 25, 26, and then you really start pushing.
I'd like to point out that some of the pushback that we got when we talked about building a middle school and high school was there wouldn't be enough students to fill it. And that's just simply not the truth. The problem is we're going to have too many students, but that's always been the vision. The vision has always been, and that's why we started talking about a third school site, maybe a couple years ago, was to have a 3-school system, and that we would alleviate pressure from the elementary school and middle school with that third school. And at that point, I think we're good for a long time. And even after that, the vision of having what we call the middle school, high school facility with the ability to educate 2,200 students does give you that large high school if you ever need it 10, 15, 20 years down the road, and you could build a middle school. Arlington High School's capacity is around 2,000 students, I believe, 2,100, 2,200, something like that. So that facility that we have will be able to accommodate that when we get to that point. So while all this is in the short term a little bit scary, the plan that we have in place and have been talking about will accommodate the needs for Lakeland for a long time. And it's a thoughtful plan. And building or completing the high school side will alleviate some of the pressure at the middle school for several years until we have 4 years of high school students there. So that will help too, I believe. Is that your analysis, Dr. Horrell?
Yes, it is. And I'll also point out for the type of facility that we would need for an intermediate school would most likely, and I may get myself in trouble with architects, would most likely be a 1-year build versus the 2-year, basically kind of 18 to 24-month build that we're doing now with the high school. It'd just be a simpler kind of construction. Obviously, you'd add another basketball gym, which is a good thing certainly. But for the most part, that it's a much simpler kind of construction.
Now, I've said this before, but I like saying it. I like the idea of having an intermediate school versus a second elementary or a second middle school because it keeps you from competing with yourself.
Right.
It keeps all the kids together, K through 12. You don't get into an issue of one school being better than another. So I like that idea, and I like the plan and vision. And it's good to have these problems. It means Lakeland is a desirable city. It means our school system is a desirable system, and it's good to have these types of problems.
On the executive summary that you sent us, number 8 says total district enrollment K through 8 is forecasted to increase by 13.6% over the next 5 years.
Hmm?
But then the 5 years beyond that is 1.3%. Do you know why that's the? I mean, I almost thought that was an error.
I don't accept that, and he alludes to that, and he said in an earlier email to me, which I don't think it would be appropriate to refer to, certainly, but he was talking about empty nesters staying more than he usually sees in Lakeland, that it kind of defies some of the typical turnover, that we are getting a lot of new construction, but there aren't as many existing homes that are flipping over to families as he often sees, that folks, and it kind of gives the sense, and I heard this about Germantown a little bit too, that, folks move here and they raise their families here and they like it and they stay, whereas sometimes they would think, all right, I'm done raising my family, I'm going to leave. And he says that those numbers are lower than usual. So I think he's thinking with the home construction, at some point that boom maybe ends. And he does, he looks at things like sewered areas and places that are appropriate for development, and he may have just kind of thought at some point that maxes out, and, you know, if the folks stay where they are, you got these new families in, that it would lead to a plateau.
That makes sense. I mean, a generation of parents who've had their kids go through the schools in this community from the very beginning may decide to stay more than people who had kids before the school system was complete. Okay, thanks.
He said, his comments there, the local housing market remains strong, as I'm sure you're seeing there, but the problem is the existing home market. True, anything being sold now is gone in less than a week. But as all the realtors will tell you, the supply is at an all-time low. The elderly are just not moving or downsizing, was the way he characterized it.
Else.
When you made mention to an intermediate school, you envision that as more of a, I guess traditionally you'd say, oh, we're building elementary or we're building a middle school. Would you say it would kind of technically fall along the lines of elementary school? Because I'm sure it varies in cost on which grades you're building for, and
The answer is yes, I think. No, to extrapolate, I think it would be closer, and I don't want people to start thinking my middle schooler can't go to an elementary school. It would be closer to an elementary school than what we built for the middle school. And I do want to remind, everybody, not you guys, but when we built the middle school, we were building it to be a future high school. So I mean, that's a high school library, and we basically essentially built, high school facilities in a way, knowing that it would serve middle school students, but it would probably be closer in terms of design to what we would typically see at a traditional middle school or elementary school, I guess, if that answers your question. You might punch up if you wanted to and felt like you had the money, you might punch up the gymnasium a little bit and, some of the spaces. But for the most part, it'd be an academic kind of focused school with specialty spaces like you'd see.
We talked about being able to share this with the BOC in the past. I know you've gone to the BOC and presented this information just so that they could have these same kind of questions and clarifications when they weren't able to attend our meetings. And I don't know if it'd be appropriate for Chairman Floyd or you to potentially reach out and figure out if the BOC wants to entertain this right now, just so they're fully informed and can look many years down the road, because I think it would go along with their visioning that they're doing. So I don't really, logistically, y'all talk about how to do it, whether it would be Chairman Floyd or you or whatever, but I certainly would like the BOC, with their focus right now on a long-term vision, to see this same information and can incorporate that, since they are our funding body, and how, if they see the same vision or they see the same growth and agree that we should build, and how we all can handle it moving forward in 5 years or 6 years or whatever it is. So I think it's certainly a discussion that needs to start now, and the sooner we bring everybody together, and whether it be virtually or in person or whatever, that it would be better to talk about it now instead of it somebody thinking it's a surprise or I didn't understand that, so everybody can get clarity as far enough in advance as possible.
I think that's a great idea, and as you can imagine, I'm certainly willing to present before the BOC or, as part of a retreat or in any way that the board determined. I mean, I think one of the reasons this policy is a good policy that kind of prompted this discussion is so that the board can consider the best way to, handle this data.
But appetite from the board to have a joint meeting, working session between the school board and the BOC to have this kind of a conversation with that group, so that not relying simply on, but the whole of the two bodies collaborate.
Why don't we do this, Dr. Horrell? Why don't you reach out to the city manager, and you can start that process and see if there's information that I say this jokingly, but it's pretty much true. The hardest thing we do is agree on dates with anybody, especially another body that has 5 other members. And go ahead and start, and then we can maybe bring it back to us in March at our work session, if we have a work session in March, and we can look at it then.
Okay.
That might be, suffice, Mr. Burnett?
Right. All right. I'm going to reassume my original position.
This was just a report. It does not require a vote.
Thanks for sharing all that information.
We're
It's really
certainly welcome. Thank you. Good
Are
discussion.
you ready to proceed?
I am. Let's go.
Next item.
Next item is discussion action on joint statement of boards of education expressing concern with the 80% TCAP testing participation requirement of Senate Bill 7001 and the third grade retention provision of House Bill 7004 as amended.
Is there a motion to get this item on the floor?
Move.
We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. I'll speak to this briefly. This is a resolution that we discussed in our work session last week. Ms. Harrison's proposed language was added into the body of the document. It's before us for a vote. Any discussion on this resolution? Hearing none. All in favor of approving the resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next item.
Next item is discussion action on update to policy 5.606, political activities.
Is there a motion to get this item on the floor?
Move.
We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Ms. Harrison, I see your name beside this item.
We had a discussion about this, I believe it was last July, and I believe Mr. Plumey took some stuff back. And so does this have the updated language we discussed today, or no?
No, but I've got a proposed
Okay.
amendment that
Okay.
I can set up whenever you're ready.
So the prompting or thought was that as social media, and I'm just going to give the background, and then we can, if you don't mind, and then we can talk about the revised language. So as social media becomes more integrated in people's lives, certainly many people go out there and identify who their employer is, and your employer has a position where it may not be the same as your position. And when you go out there and identify yourself as an employee of that school system, it's sometimes when you're out there, it's hard to distinguish between the workplace and your personal. So the point of, in this revision too, is to delineate where the workplace stops and where your personal starts on your social media when you identify yourself as an employee of the entity. So if you would, I'm requesting, I guess it would be appropriate for me to make a motion to amend at this point. Okay.
Yes, and I want to thank Ms. Harrison for her work on this and her thoughtfulness on it. And I'll also say she brought this up, and we were really about to head into the heat of an election cycle of a national election. I think Ms. Harrison wisely decided, let's wait until after that, so we're not kind of jumping in the middle of conversations that might already be happening. And I think the challenge is making sure that employees understand that they do have the right to express political opinions, but also understanding that there should not be confusion as to whose opinions those are. So I had a good conversation with Ms. Harrison this morning and a follow-up conversation with Mr. Plumley, and he has proposed some language that Ms. Harrison has not heard. So to be fair, if it's not your intention expressed here, but the amendment would be to replace the new section with the following. Employees have a right to express their views as private citizens on matters of public concern, but shall not represent that the personal views that they express are the views of the Board of Education or school system. And now this is me talking. Ms. Harrison, I feel like that would allow me to present to the faculty some solid options of how to do that, some of the things that we talked about. You can either take off your profile that you're an employee of Lakeland School System, or if you want to leave that there, add something in the bio that says, opinions are my own and mine personally, or some different kind of training. This would give me the flexibility that's not kind of a word-for-word thing, but also expresses our understanding and support of the idea that folks get to have opinions on things no matter where they work. So.
I'll make a motion to amend with the language that Mr. Plumlee has and Dr. Worrell have worked out.
We have a motion to amend with the language that Dr. Horrell proposed. Is there a second to that?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second, so now we're talking about the amendment. I would like to get Mr. Plumlee's thoughts before we move too far along, because there's a myriad of legal issues, I guess, that could be attached to this.
Dr. Horrell and I, want me on record? Sure. Dr. Horrell and I started talking about this months ago, and then it sort of went dormant, and then we started talking about it again today. And like I've expressed to Dr. Horrell, I was okay as from a legal standpoint with both the original proposed amendment as well as the amendment that we're now talking about. My understanding is the amendment as revised that's currently on the floor just addresses some concerns as far as a practical concerns that Dr. Horrell had. And I'll also say that of the other municipal schools, they all have some similar language as is being discussed right now. So it's not as if Lakeland schools would be going and doing something extraordinary with respect to this policy. This is similar to the language that all the other schools have as well, or I should say most of the other schools have as well.
Good. Well, now, again, we're discussing the amendment. So any discussion on the amendment?
Would you mind reading the amendment one more time?
Not at all. Employees have a right to express their views as private citizens on matters of public concern, but shall not represent that the personal views that they express are the views of the Board of Education or Lakeland School System.
I first heard it, and I think I heard the amendment this time. In as presented, there was an affirmative requirement for the employee to say that they were being clear that their view was their own and not. But as I heard the second amendment, I don't hear an affirmative requirement for the employee to make that designation.
That's correct. And one of the things we talked about was that it may have been too restrictive. It was kind of asking employees to be accountable for every time they want to make a statement. They've got to remember the exact language that the Board of Education approved. This would basically give us, I think under this policy, I would be comfortable if we got a concern or a complaint that somebody was kind of messaging something that was confusing. It would give me the opportunity to say, let's talk about how we can make this more clear. One is, put this in your bio. Another would be, take off of your about that you are a teacher at Lakeland School System. Another one would be, if you want to not do either of those things and just include it in your post every time, these are some options that would allow me to objectively say, well, I feel like based on the policy that they have tried to make that clear. But you're correct in your analysis of what it does, yeah.
Thank you for that clarification, Chief. I think that makes me more comfortable. I was a little anxious about the first wording, and the amendment makes me more comfortable with this.
Further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, and we're only voting on the amendment. All in favor of approving the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. The policy has been amended. We're back on the policy. Any further discussion on the policy? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the policy, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Policy is approved. Next item. Mr. Burnett.
This requires two readings? Or
It's
no,
an,
this is
it's an, it's an amendment to an existing policy, so it will be effective immediately. Very good. It's a good question.
Ask every
We
time.
did. Next item, Dr. Horrell.
Next item is discussion action on FY 2021 budget amendments.
Is there a motion to get this item on the floor?
I'll move.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. Dr. Horrell, would you like to speak to this?
Would. Most of this budget amendment is kind of routine cleaning up of funds and in particular federal programs. There is one significant transfer in from fund balance that I wanted to make sure that the board is aware of. When we started the design for Lakeland Prep, There were several spaces that kind of started out as what we call would-be nices. Sometimes I think of things as have to have and would be nice. These were particularly athletic facilities and then some additional parking. They were not the facilities themselves that it would take to play ball, but it was locker rooms, concession stands, field houses, and we've discussed this. And so what we decided to do is go ahead and basically design these. We owned that we were going to pay for the design of these, but when we hired the construction managers, we asked them to price these as add alternates, and that we would kind of be able to push the decision back a little bit. We are now to the point where the contractor needs to know if we are committed to these additional facilities, and some of this is the FF&E to make those facilities happen. So if you're going to have a concession stand, you have to have the kitchen equipment that goes in the concession stand. We're buying ice makers for everywhere that we think might need ice makers. It was one of the things we didn't do on the front end, much to our regret, I think, on the football field concession stand. But long story short, this would be the board committing $2 million from fund balance and putting it towards the project so we could go ahead and build out these facilities, which does also include some additional parking that we would wind up needing to do anyway, and do it now. I think it's a more efficient use of the funds. As we've said before, it's cheaper to do things if crews are already mobilized. I think the community is going to be happier if we open with something closer to fully realized facilities for baseball, softball. These are things that would be used by track and field, for soccer. Otherwise, unfortunately, you wind up with some kind of haves and have-nots. Some groups have their own locker rooms and coaches' offices and field houses, and some organizations don't. So long story short, that's what the $2 million would be for.
I had a few comments before can you tell us the current fund balance?
I can, if you'll give me just a second. Okay, including the most recent contribution, our fund balance right now is just over $7 million. It's $7,057,075. I will point out $1 million of this is set aside for the elementary school land purchase. So in addition, if we took the $2 million out, this would leave $4 million in our fund balance, which I noted, I think is still remarkable considering that we're also paying $700,000 towards debt service and have been for the past 2 years. And I'll also remind that we started, probably fairly obviously, Lakeland School System with zero fund balance. And but that's what it would leave. It would leave $4 million.
It would leave us roughly about a balance of $4 million. And can you give us just an overview? I know you've said what facilities this would include.
Yes, specifically among the things that we thought we could get away without if we had to, there is a baseball, softball facility that has locker rooms and coaches' offices. There's also baseball, softball concession stands. This would include the bleachers for baseball and softball, which you technically wouldn't have to start playing ball. There's a multi-purpose locker room, basically, that would accommodate 2 different teams depending on the seasons. So basically the way we've got it figured out, if it were used, it would be used both as a visiting football locker room, it could be used as track and field locker rooms, and then also soccer locker rooms as well. And then there's additional pretty significant swath of parking that we would go ahead and build out that would be on the southwest side of the football field. It's actually just south of where soccer is. So there's some of that you could technically get away with not having right away, but I think we'll be happier if we have it. Oh, and then there's a pretty significant maintenance and storage shed that would be used for the equipment that's going to be necessary to keep all the grass cut.
One thing that I think we learned from the middle school project was I think it would be very beneficial to have these facilities in place when we open. we've got the bands together, so to speak, the construction crews here, it'll be cheaper to do. And parents are just going to expect a finished product. And I think we owe it to our parents, community, and students to do that. So I support this amendment and open it up for further discussion. Ms. Harrison.
So just for clarity, could you answer, does this jeopardize our payments still remaining to the city, or this has zero impact to our payments still to the city? I believe we have 2 left or 3 left on the 2 or 3 payments left of 700,000.
It does not. We've been, like for this year, basically we had a certain amount of fund balance. We subtracted the 700,000, then donated the balance to fund balance, and that would be the intention, every year.
I just want to make sure that that was clear, that this does not impact the city's
No,
payment, and there is
we're
no change to. Okay.
Committed to that, for sure.
And then also, just a point, I know you listed all the things. You also didn't mention that we have funded the I can't say that word, but we have actually funded the OPEB liabilities to a higher, or to the level fully funded in addition. So just so the board is reminded of that when we talk about the $4 million, we also have been funding our OPEB liability in significant chunks too, and have continued. Certainly, we could have put more away, I guess, in savings, but we have done our due diligence with making sure we're keeping up with our OPEB liability. So I don't have heartburn with the $4 million left in fund balance and spending the $2 million. I think we've had this, some discussions in addition about wanting, lighting packages, all the things. It's not just about the sports. So I don't want everybody to think it's just about the sports. We've had discussion about the funds for lighting in the facilities and making sure our studios, or whatever you want to reference them as, for our fine arts are there. The extra practice field was something we didn't have to include for the band, but we included that for the band, for the marching band to have the fine arts. So I know we're talking about the facilities for sports and all those, but in our build out, just within the, not including this 2 million, we were including other things for the fine arts, which took up this 2 million. I guess I'm trying to say that kind of, we could have had trade-offs where fine arts would have gotten things that maybe, baseball wouldn't have had a finished facility. So this, I think, allows us to do both. So I don't have a concern about doing it and doing it right, because this facility should last us, as we've set up here, 20, 30 more years. Certainly we'll have to
It'll
do.
outlive us.
Yes,
Good,
hopefully.
yeah.
Hopefully it's not 10, but hopefully we don't outgrow it in 10. But certainly it should be our high school facility for many, many, many years to come. And if so, we should do it right on the front end, and not try to have the added expense of bringing these crews back out here, which we have seen mobilization of construction crews, especially right now. It seems like this boom in construction, you get behind and it's harder to get crews out. Things are more expensive. I think I've heard that construction costs have gone up significantly in the past year. So even those costs, I'm supportive of it. I think it's right. I've told you this repeatedly. We need to do this right out of the gate. Certainly there's some things we get wrong, or we say, oh, I wish we had done this. But at the things we can anticipate and do something about, let's do it.
Further discussion on this item, Mr. Burnett?
I just want to thank Ms. Harrison to make the comment that this isn't sports trumping fine arts or other things. This is supplementing and adding to, so that we're not saying, oh, I wish we could have. You already have done. This is just finishing out the rest of that. So thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
What is the recommended amount that we should keep in the fund balance?
Remember that percentage, Ms. Millspaw? It's a. I know we would still be within it, because that's Ms. Rosales and I had that conversation. And I think we'd well exceeded, in fact, even with the $4 million, but I don't recall what it was.
Well, I was curious. You're always so thrifty with things that you're proposing in areas where you know that, this is going to be great and we don't need to go to this further expense to do this because this is exactly what we need. So I really appreciate that. I really appreciate all the work you do, looking at theater seats and track surfaces and all that stuff. I mean, you always put forth exactly the information we need. And I do think when you think about what's involved in the high school addition building, all those spaces that do already have fine arts, the science, a lot of different areas are already served and part of the plan, and this is just something that is more noticeable because it's outside. So I appreciate the fact that we're going to be ready on day one, and like you said, I think our parents are going to be really, really happy with the product.
I'll say this, I don't think there's any, I get more and more excited about it every time. They're putting in the auditorium slope right now, as Ms. Thomas alluded. We're picking out seats and lighting systems and curtain fabrics, and it's really going to be, I think, something special. Yeah.
We're only going to do it once,
That's right, yep.
so let's do it right. Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next item.
Me. Next item is a carryover. I really want to make sure the YouTube folks can hear because they can't. The next item is a carryover from the work session. It simply notes that we have reviewed Policy Manual Section 5. My understanding is we don't have any policies to bring before the board at this time.
The item doesn't require any action. Are there any announcements? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn? We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Go Lions.
Forgot one announcement. Happy birthday to Ms. Childs.
Oh, yeah. Happy birthday.
You're spending your birthday